Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and somebody who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. So if you're interested in an interesting discussion today, stay tuned. Today I am responding to a viewer request to look at the indictment of Sean Combs. Now, you may know him as Puff Daddy or P. Diddy. I have a problem referring to a grown man as P. Diddy because it sounds like a question. But at any rate, that's who we're talking about today and the indictment that was issued against him by the federal government. Before we actually get into a little bit of the indictment, I have to tell you some of the things that I can't do. YouTube will not allow me to talk about the worst of the allegations in this complaint. And the reason that they won't is because they're very disturbing. They are the kinds of things that I think, frankly, are pure evil. And as a result of that, they don't want some child stumbling into this, and they don't want anyone with, great sensitivity to come across this video and be aghast that we are talking about these kinds of things. So you can find the indictment available online. Usually, I think it's through the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York City or Manhattan, United States Attorney's Office. And you can download it and you can read the whole thing for yourself if you want to. I would not advise doing that unless you just have morbid curiosity about how people with millions of dollars spend their money. I'm just amazed at what I read in this indictment. So, a couple of questions first. The one that springs readily to mind is this indictment talks about actions that occurred over a span of years. In fact, the indictment refers to actions that have taken place since 2009. Now, none of these actions were taken in secret. Many of them took place at commercial hotels and other places that would, I think, have an interest in perhaps interdicting this kind of behavior, although I don't know that for sure because certainly it didn't happen. The breadth of the activities that went on are just almost unimaginable. And with a guy who had such a high profile, and he was so famous and made such great amounts of money from his recording and I guess his other activities as well, you would think that he would have come to the attention of law enforcement well before he did. And that's my central question in looking at this indictment. How long did the federal authorities who actually indicted him know that all of this stuff was going on? And why did it take so long and so many victims to get to the point where something was done about it? To the extent that, the government claims it didn't have knowledge, well, I guess that explains 1 or 2 years. To the extent that maybe they used informants or they had to flip other people, I can understand where that would explain 1 or 2 years. But from 2009 to 2024 is essentially 15 years. 15 years of gross violations of federal law, state law, unbelievable drug allegations. These are the kinds of things that make you wonder what the federales were doing while all of this was going on. And I think that's a fair question. And I think it's one that needs to be answered. Now, as you know, an indictment is just that. It is an indictment. It is a series of allegations. And nothing has been proved to this date. And as a result of that, he is presumed innocent until he's proved guilty. Now, if they can establish everything that is set out in this indictment, he would probably be convicted. But again, that's going to depend on a jury, unless Mr. Combs decides that he is going to, reach some kind of plea bargain with the federal government. But if he does reach a plea bargain based on the contents of this indictment, he will serve time in prison. I don't think there's any way around that. He's not going to get off with a slap on the wrist, no matter how famous he is. Sometimes you have to send a message. So with that, let's take a look at the parts of the indictment that we can look into and discuss a little bit without getting into the really awful stuff. And here's what it says. For decades, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Diddy, a.k.a. PD, a.k.a. Love, the defendant, abused, threatened, coerced women and others around him to fulfill certain desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, influence of a multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, the first one there, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. And then they go through the whole AKAs again. We're not going to do that. The defendant operated his business headquartered at various Manhattan and Los Angeles places under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global, collectively Combs Business, which sort of sounds like something that bald people wouldn't need a whole lot of. Corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcohol spirits business, a marketing agency, and a television network and media company. At all times relevant to the indictment, Love, the defendant, engaged in a persistent and pervasive pattern of bad behavior toward women and other individuals. This bad behavior was at times verbal, emotional, and physical. As part of his pattern of Combs manipulated young ladies to do things that no reasonable person would manipulate someone to do. At times, Combs and others acting at his direction made arrangements for these folks to do things, again, that were awful by essentially filling them full of narcotics, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. In paragraph 4, it says this bad behavior was recurrent and widely known. Okay, if it was widely known, how did it take you guys 15 years to indict him? I mean, that's like admitting that somebody in the federal government was asleep at the switch. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it certainly looks that way, and it looks bad for the government. You should never allow someone to get away with this kind of conduct for that length of time. Anyway, back to the indictment. On numerous occasions from at least on or about 2009 and continuing for years, Combs did all of these bad things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects, kicking women. The assaults were at times witnessed by others, including at one instance a Los Angeles hotel in March of 2016, which was captured on video and later publicly reported. It was captured on video, it was publicly reported, and still the government did nothing. There are some questions that need to be asked of our law enforcement officials about how this happened, about how this went on for so long. It is almost like the lives of these women were terribly undervalued. So the indictment goes on and talks about Combs's enterprise and his businesses and its leadership, its members, all of these things. It goes through all of this. And it talks about the purposes of the enterprises, which essentially were to serve the base desires of Mr. Combs, allegedly, and means and methods of the enterprise. This is where they get into how it was done, what was done, how this activity came about. It is pretty sick, I'll say that. The racketeering conspiracy, in addition to charging him with just the underlying crimes, they've also brought a RICO count against him, and a racketeering complaint essentially sets out the conspiracy, and then it sets out all of the predicate acts that went into the predicate criminal acts that went into this particular conspiracy. And they go through all of those. Then they get down to count 2, which is essentially a more of this bad behavior. Count 3 is transporting and engaging in bad behavior. They make forfeiture allegations. So if they convict Mr. Combs, because I just can't call him that other name, if they convict Mr. Combs, he's going to forfeit all of the proceeds of his criminal activity. And of course, they named his record label and all of these other activities under the Combs business sort of umbrella. And as a result, they would probably impoverish him. And if they convict him, they will more likely than not throw him in the federal slammer for a long time. Now, of course, in the federal system, one of the features of the federal system is they have the sentencing guidelines. And the sentencing guidelines don't allow federal prosecutors to charge you with one crime, like jaywalking, and then 67 counts of it, and then you get a separate sentence for each of the 67 and run them together. That isn't how it works out. They have this entire matrix. There's all kinds of different factors that go into the sentencing. So even if, for example, you rob a bank and you assault someone with a firearm, those crimes merge for sentencing, and that figures into how many months you're going to get in a federal prison. Now, another unique feature of federal law, although I think Florida has now adopted this procedure, is that when you do get convicted and you get sentenced to 52 months in prison, well, you do 51 and a half months in prison. The last 6 months, they send you out to a halfway house, supposedly to reintegrate you into society. I suspect by the time Mr. Combs gets out of prison, if he is indeed convicted, and again, he's innocent until he's proved guilty, assuming he is convicted, I suspect they will be having flying cars by the time he gets out of prison. This is really awful stuff. And I can imagine that a jury would look at this and say, this is beyond the pale. One of the interesting facts about federal law enforcement and the federal U.S. Attorney's Office is that they are unlikely to bring any charge they can't prove. In other words, they have to be about 95% certain that they can get a conviction before they ever start down that road. Because when you aim at a high-profile person like this, you have to be absolutely certain that you can bring the case to closure in a positive way. From what I've read in the indictment, if all of it can be proved, it is pretty awful. But you have to keep in mind that these are only allegations. Mr. Combs has not been proved to have done any of these things. And as a result of that, we have to keep an open mind. And jurors have to keep an open mind. Now, as a preliminary matter, the magistrate and the federal judge involved have denied bail. Normally, bail is considered to be a right, that if you are charged with a crime, that you have a right to be out on bail. And all bail does is ensure that you are going to show up for the trial. But there were early allegations that Mr. Combs was thinking about jumping on an airplane and flying to some other country. And if that's the case, then they are definitely not going to want him to skip out and fly to another country, Costa Rica or El Salvador, where there is no extradition treaty. Doesn't mean he can't be extradited or brought back to the United States, depending on how you want to think about that. But certainly it makes it more difficult and more costly for the government, so what they do is they deny bail. And that's what's happened. As a result of that, all of the pretrial work that gets done on Mr. Combs' case is going to get done in a jail conference room. And that's going to be very unpleasant for Mr. Combs. Obviously, one of the tactics here probably is by making him stay in jail, in custody, for that period of time. There's a good chance that that ratchets up the pressure for him to, or his counsel, to push to make a deal. To make some kind of deal where he does some time in a federal prison. But the long and short of it is they will try very hard to increase the pressure so that he does do the right thing and reach some kind of agreement. But again, he also has a lot of resources that he can bring to bear and hire lawyers. And although the government can issue its forfeiture allegations and hopefully prove those at trial, they can't interfere with his right to employ counsel, and that's going to be another issue. They may wind up having to litigate that. I wish I could go into the entirety of this. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go look at the indictment, read it. If you have any specific questions, you can email me at the address above, and I will be happy to respond to it. But this is going to be one of those cases that, because it's in federal court, you're not going to get any video on, but the reporting on it is going to be very interesting and perhaps even entertaining at points. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, again, drop them in the comments down below or email me at the address above. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have the opportunity today, do something nice for somebody. You know, every morning I make my wife's lunch for her. I build her a big salad, throw in some ham or some turkey or some chicken and all of that. And then I always find a way to put something sweet in there for her, because who doesn't like a little dessert with their lunch? I mean, come on, be real. I think it's important sometimes to recognize that the things we do for the people we love are just as important as the things we do for people we don't know from Adam. And that's something, when you think about doing a kindness, it doesn't have to be for the guy on the street. It can just be for someone you live with, a parent, a child, a spouse, whatever. Again, kindness is never repaid. It's only passed on. Thanks for watching. After you've done a kindness for somebody, come on back down here, join me at the beach, and we'll talk about something else tomorrow. I shouldn't have to say this, but you don't seek legal advice from a guy down at the beach. You seek it from a lawyer in a lawyer's office, where there are people running around in suits and secretaries and all kinds of other people. I'm just a YouTuber. I'm a retired attorney at this point, and although I retain my license to practice in the state of Missouri, I am not here dispensing legal advice. I'm just offering general content on the law. So please don't take anything I say here as legal advice, and if you need legal advice, see a lawyer in your jurisdiction. And here are some videos that YouTube thinks you may enjoy.